Hi everyone, how's everybody doing? This week we're going to tackle chapter 7 in Persuasion. And chapter 7 talks about language and the words that we use when we talk about persuasion. And so the effect that certain words that we use will have an effect on that act of persuasion. So instead of saying something is good, using the word, you know, it's excellent, better than ever, right? It isn't an all out lie, right? To use those words, but maybe adds something to it, right? And so language has a powerful place when it comes to persuasion. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. So we start off by saying a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. If we name the rose another name, would it still smell nice? I guess that's the question we're going to ask ourselves is, you know, we call a rose, and that's the name. And when we smell it, we think, oh, it's nice, it smells beautiful, we love it, we like it, Ray, right? And famously, the quote is, a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. But what if we called that rose by something else? What if it wasn't called a rose? What if it was called fart, right? If we our knowledge and our ideas of what fart is, if we called a flower a fart, regardless of how nice it smelled, would we think it was nice? And some of you might be thinking, well, yeah, it still smells nice, but then really when you start thinking about it, you're like, yeah, but if it's called a fart, would I dare to smell it? And so it really has an effect on your psyche. And so we first start off by understanding that symbols, meanings, and persuasion, the power of babble, the power of talk, right? And we start off by understanding connotative and denotative meaning. That's not how I see it. Basically, is how it amounts to. And when you talk about a connotative meaning refers to the thoughts and emotions associated with the word, whereas denotative meaning deals more with its direct definition. So I try to remember those two by understanding that denotative dictionary, right? So denotative is what the dictionary defines it as, whereas connotative means more of what we think it means, or kind of an association, very symbolic, right? So some of those words may include things like patriotism, justice, freedom, right? Things that have sort of a bigger meaning than what the words actually are, right? So when you talk about, for example, the word love, its definition might be, the act of caring for another individual. Whereas if you say love for some people, it's like, oh, love is this deep feeling of emotions. And for other people who are maybe more passionate, love is heartache, love is this, or love is that. And all of a sudden it takes on a bigger meaning than what it's actually defined as. So it's so interesting to sort of see the difference between what connotative means and denotative means, and how those words are used. Secondly, we look up the what's called ultimate terms, speak of the devil. And when you're talking about these ultimate terms, these are words or phrases that are highly revered, widely accepted, and carry special power in culture. In other words, these are things that really sort of mean something special to us, kind of like what we talked about a little bit earlier when we talked about words like patriotism, for example. When we talk about patriotism, it really stands for something, right? These are things that really amount to pride and culture and who we are and what we represent. And so those terms, these are like the ultimate terms. These are things that are revered. The words themselves are revered. Okay. Next thing we have what's called aphorisms. And when we're talking about aphorisms, let's go here. We're talking about the idea that aphorisms are persuasive because they are succinct, easily remembered, and appear to contain truisms, right? And what that means is that an aphorism is like a piece of advice, right? This little nuance that we sort of remember. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Look before you leap, right? These are things that are sort of pieces of advice that we're told, and have gone from generations to generations because people just sort of remember them. They have some sort of way of being remembered. You know, look both ways before you cross the street. Never take any wooden nickels. Um, you know, just sort of truisms, right? Things that are just inherently true and that we always remember, right? These are things that we hear from our parents, right? Respect is earned, not given, right? These are sort of things that we sort of live by, if you want to sort of call it that. So that's a um, that's an aphorism, right? That rings a bell, as it'll say on the. Then we have metaphors. And metaphors, and a lot of you probably already kind of know what we're talking about there. And we're talking about metaphors, and we mentioned a little bit earlier, we talked about love. Metaphors is really how we describe something using another word to describe it. So in the book, it talks about how love is a battlefield. If you start talking about love, right? Um, love is um, love is a losing game, right? Love is a rose, right? These are all words that are being used to describe what love is, depending on what your definition of love is, right? And I mean, think about it. When you talk about love, love is a battlefield. What does that mean, right? What's the message that's trying to be conveyed by that song? That's actually from a song from Pat Benatar, which some of you may have heard, depending on how old you are. So it's always interesting to sort of understand what metaphors are and how they work. The next thing we have here is what's called the power of labeling. And in the power of labeling, it almost comes down to how you name things, right? It's interesting, even your names, what you call yourself, right? Either by a nickname, the name that your parents gave you, almost has sort of a clear definition. I recall when we were thinking about a name for our son, we wanted to have a name that sounded like a strong name, right? It wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to be something that was either one syllable or two. It had to have sort of a strong name, but it couldn't be too long, right? And it also needed to be a word that could easily be translated from English and Spanish without having to change the words, right? The letters, I'm sorry. So, like, for example, for some people, I believe it's Gerardo is William, and then that's how it sort of translates, or Jaime is Jamie. The A and the I or Guillermo, I'm sorry, Guillermo goes with William, and you just sort of switch a couple letters, but nonetheless it's not identical. Sebastian, on the other hand, which is my son's name, it translates exactly the same with the same letter. Sebastian, Sebastian, right? It's the same thing. And the reason behind it is because we thought to ourselves, to us, what was a strong name? What was a name that people could be sort of go, oh wow, Sebastian, yeah, I like that. And a lot of people name different things, they brand it to mean something, right? They label it in accordance to what they are. You know, keeping up with the Joneses is sort of an interesting saying, because when we're talking about the Joneses, who are the Joneses, and why are we keeping up with them, right? That label sort of stuck. That label, what we call that, sort of stands for something. And so it's interesting that the label that we use also have a power of persuasion. And then the last thing we have here in this section is called euphemisms. And when we're talking about euphemisms, you're talking about double speak. You're talking about things that sort of you say it in replacement of something else, right? And when you're talking about double speak, you're talking about ambiguous or evasive language, right? It's when you're not exactly saying the whole truth, but you are saying something, right? You're not being directly truthful. You know, how are you doing today? Oh, okay. Oh, what exactly does that mean, right? Because okay means okay, but okay could be not okay, could be I could be doing better, right? There's a lot of things that go into that. Whereas when you talk about let's see, where's the other? There's other. A euphemism is inoffensive terms substituted for offensive terms, right? And some of them could be used, and a lot of times we see sort of microaggressions going into these terms. So it's like saying, "Yeah, your hair is so pretty." What do you mean by that? What do you mean it's so pretty? Are you trying to say that it's not, or that it's something else, but you're substituting the word pretty with, I mean, that word with the word pretty so that you won't offend anybody? And it doesn't necessarily always have to be something offensive. Think of think of like a situation where um think of a situation where maybe you're talking to a young child, a young child about death, right? Maybe they're, God forbid, right? They're one of their parents passed away. You know, would you, when they ask, "Where's mommy?" or "Where's daddy?" were you to say, "Oh, they died"? Well, it's true, they died. Or are you more likely to say, "Oh, you know what? They're in heaven now," or "They're in your heart," right? And it's sort of an easier way to digest the information without sounding so offensive, so direct. And in some cases, that's really what a lot of people use to get bad news across, right? They try to use, words that are inoffensive in order to get the message across. They can't say they're lying, but at the same time, are they really telling you the full truth, right? So it's sort of interesting how that works. Um, Next thing we have is language, intensity, vividness, and offensiveness. And here we're talking about profanity and persuasion. Think about situations, speeches, or other situations where you may have heard someone use profanity to get their message across. Was that a negative or a positive influence? Was profanity used in a way to enhance or diminish the speech? And how did you take it? As an audience member, when somebody was giving a speech and all of a sudden they started, cussing, using bad language, did that enhance the speech? Did that motivate you? Did that get you going? Or did it distance you did you distance yourself from the message and say, "No, this isn't for me"? It really is sort of an interesting thing to consider how profanity plays a role in how we persuade someone. And a lot of the athletes, for example, if you yourself played in sports, for example, or maybe you saw a sports movie on TV, a lot of times we'll notice that coaches will use profanity as a way to really motivate and push their players uh, um, to do better. Okay. The next thing is political correctness. Choosing proper words as a form of having an equitable distribution in the way we approach people. And it's an interesting thing when we talk about political correctness, because there are some people that argue on one side that, oh, we are just taking that whole political correctness thing just way out the window. Where other people on this side will say, well, you know what? I think everybody needs to be treated in a certain way. We can't offend anybody, right? And it's that offensive tone that we're worried about. We want to be politically correct because we don't want to offend anybody. But other people will argue, but in order to get your point across, in order to actually persuade someone, you have to confront them. And a lot of times that means that political correctness is not necessarily altogether there. You have to sort of cross over that line. And some of you might be thinking to yourself, well, we should always be, we should always try to be politically correct. Should we? What if there was a situation where politically correctness didn't get what you wanted or didn't allow you to get your point across? Are you just going to be satisfied with where you are and just say, okay, couldn't do it? Or are you going to push the envelope to get your message across because you really believe in your message? It really just kind of depends. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but it's sort of an understanding of what it is. Um, the next thing we have is the effects of vividness. A picture is worth 1,000 words. How do you color the scenario? Right? Imagine for a second the person you're talking to can't see you or can't see what you're talking about. And so you have to literally paint the picture with words. When you're saying that the sky is blue, what exactly do you mean? Are you saying, oh, the sky has a hue of blue that you can only sense from an early morning mist as it comes through the ocean? It's like, oh, wow, you're really painting a picture there, right? And so you have to also understand the vividness that comes into persuasion and how the clearer the picture, the more persuasive you're probably likely to be. And then language intensity. How intense is the language? How strong is the language that you're using in order to get your message across? It's like, are you saying, "Hey, everybody, let's get going," or is it, "Come on, everybody, be strong, let's go, let's go"? Yeah, it's not profanity laden, but it's still a strong language, and those are things that we sort of have to consider as we start doing some of these things. And then the last thing we have here is powerless language in persuasion. And these are sort of words or nonverbal cues that sort of, for some people, make us look a little weak, right? And so think of a situation where someone hesitates as they're giving a speech, or they say a lot, or they just have a way about communicating that doesn't necessarily show a lot of confidence, right? Maybe they don't make great eye contact. Maybe the words they use are intense and say, "Hey, I really believe we should do this," versus, "You know what? I really believe we should do this." It plays a key role, right? Or "Let's effing do this." I won't cuss, but I'll use effing. You kind of get the point, right? It's strong language, and it really does play a role. Not just the words you use, how you use those words in order to get your message across, and how some powerless language can help you do that. For one of the mistakes, and I really shouldn't. Actually, I take that back. I really don't want to call it a mistake. But one thing that I've been working on is my language when I email someone is, "Hello, I'm contacting you with the hope of being able to do this." Just using the word hope kind of puts me in a position of like, yeah, if it's okay with you, I really would like to do this. Whereas, as opposed to saying, "Hi, I'm emailing you today because I want to do this," or "I would like for you to reply," right? So just by removing the word hope, that turns that message into a more, not necessarily aggressive, but a more confident message. And it's sort of understanding what it is. All right. So I hope you enjoy the chapter. It's actually not a very long chapter, but it really is an important chapter as you start looking at the words that are used and how they're used and who's using them. Okay. So again, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to email me. I'm here to help you out. If you prefer, you can always have a Zoom meeting with me. Just email me and make a request, and we'll figure out a day where we can talk. All right. Good to see you all. Have a great day. Bye-bye.